Hey everybody, how's it going? Andrew Hartman here, back again with Decathlon, and today we're going to talk about economics, one of the harder subjects to learn, but also evergreen, which is great, right? It helps your seniors a lot. And so before we get into that, first thing I want to do again, subscribe to the Decathlon channel, check out our videos there. Find us on Twitter at Academic Decathlon. Facebook page is where most of the discussion happens. Decathlon Academic Decathlon. And then also check us out on the message board, demodectalk.com, where we are posting this stuff and hopefully have just some discussion other than how to pronounce Nick's last name, which I think is Synodus. I think that's where I'm getting on that one. I think that's right. So, anyways, I want to talk about economics because we've had some struggles in our class with economics so far for a few weeks in. And so what I wanted to do is just kind of take you through maybe what you need to do with your team for economics to be not a weakness or even possibly a strength. Um, my personal belief in economics for decathlon is that by far the hardest part is microeconomics. A lot of macro is memorization. Not all of it, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you I'm super well versed in it at this point. It's been a while since since I competed and since I've read it. But what I do really know well is microeconomics. I feel that microeconomics is very, very good in decathlon. It's a good primer. It doesn't get into a lot of the math. It gets into some math here and there, especially with the elasticity. It tries to do the percent changes and all that, which I think can really trip the kids up. So I think I think macro for the most part is able to be learned on their own, but microeconomics is something that they probably need a guide on, a guide for the guide, as it were. And I do think there are good resources out there for them, but I don't think they're necessarily utilized in decathlon. And so the what microeconomics really fundamentally comes down to, and I'm going to go to Khan Academy here because they do a phenomenal job of explaining this stuff. What microeconomics fundamentally is about is making sure that the students understand how supply and demand work. Almost everything in microeconomics is based off of supply and demand. Now, there are some things at the back end, especially, that they need to just memorize, like pork barrel and externalities and stuff like that. Although externalities even also really blends into supply and demand as well. But if they can understand how supply and demand work and how the shifts work, and not just the shifts, but like how the space of the graph works. The surplus, consumer and producer surplus side, when you have excess supply and excess demand, what does that do when you create surplus product and shortage of a product, right? And then also that interaction with the international market. Um, and I think that's actually where coaches can come in more than anywhere, actually almost anywhere except for subjectives, is helping them understand the process of that. Because the beauty of micro is that it looks like math, talks like math, not math. It's really not. It is very much an intuitive process that when you explain to them as a system, as a thing, right, they do tend to understand it, right? And that makes things a lot easier for them. They do also need to understand the graphs. They will ask questions about shifts and stuff, and almost certainly they will get a question throughout the year about which of the following does not shift the demand curve or the supply curve, and every single time it's price. Every single time, right? But I think that's one where teachers can come in and really actually provide a positive difference for the students. Um, there's a couple ways you can do this, and that's to provide them resources like this, like Khan Academy. Khan Academy, I think, at least in terms of micro, again, is just really, really good and really provides a lot of the stuff that they're supposed to know for us, right? Some of them are not. Cross price elasticity, I don't think that's a thing anymore. I think it used to be. Um, and I'm not going to pretend I know that much about it. It might still be, and then that's definitely worth them going in here. But price elasticity of supply elasticity of total revenue, price elasticity of demand. Elasticity, I think, is probably the hardest thing for them to understand. I know it was for me originally. So getting them to understand that is really important. Consumer and producer surplus, again, just this is the thing I think as well, that once you understand consumer and producer surplus, I think a lot of things really start to click in micro. Understanding the shifts in the demand curves and supply curves themselves is important, but it's very simple and you can kind of build a lot from there. But I think once you see consumer producer surplus as a thing, and understand how it works, that is a super crucial thing for them to learn. And then deadweight loss is and taxes is another thing that we actually just went through, that I had to really remind myself about how that works, because man, it's weird. Like, it's, the thing with that with taxes is that we've told them up to this whole point that the change in the price leads to a shift along the curve, right? Let me pull up a supply and demand curve, or equilibrium curve graph. Let's see if I can just find a basic, simple. Yeah. So what we've told them up to this point in micro is that prices will shift you along either of these curves, right? And then if it shifts you away from equilibrium, that means you'll either create a system of surplus where there's too much supply and not enough demand to say our price is, up here, our price is down here. All that is saying then is like, okay, there's too much demand, too little supply, quantity, supply and demand, of course. Can't forget that. And so you will have a shortage of that good. Not everybody will be able to purchase that good, and that those points will eventually lead us to shift towards equilibrium, except when you bring in the international market, right? And the international market changes that up a bit, because then what will happen is that this excess supply will just go to the international market if the international market price is above equilibrium. And then when it's in demand, if it's below equilibrium, then the consumers will just take that excess amount and go to the international market and buy from there. So anyways, digression. Price. So we've told them all this whole time that price changes where you are on the curve, and then taxes shows up as a price change, and then it says actually you shift the curve, right? Which I think is confusing at first, but when they understand that when you shift when you change taxes, you are actually shifting. I like to tell them it's an input cost for supply, which is not 100% true, because then it shouldn't change how demand works. Which sometimes taxes are on consumers first. It's a consumer-based tax, and then not a producer-based tax. But anyway, I like to think of it as an input cost for them, right? And then maybe for demand, you could say it's like a taste, maybe like a consumer taste thing, where yeah, it's just it's a tough one for consumers. But at any rate, if you think of it as like taxes are a thing that will shift the curve independently, and that doesn't mean that it acts like a shift, right? Let me see if I can effective tax on supply and demand on equilibrium. Let's do that on equilibrium. All right. See if I can find a good image here. Okay. Yeah, it doesn't act just like, I'm just gonna keep it. It doesn't act just like a shift, because it produces a new equilibrium point that is also creating deadweight loss, right? As you can see here, this triangle right here, I believe should establish deadweight loss. Yeah. And so. No, hang on. At any rate, it doesn't matter. So it's producing two equilibrium prices, because the gap between those two equilibrium prices, the price for consumers and the price for producers, is the tax revenue that's going to the government, right? And so that gap in the tax revenue creates this two price system. Now it's at the same quantity, which is nice. Not the same quantity that was originally, as you can see here, but at a new quantity. But it is the same quantity, obviously, for both consumers and producers. Every time less, right? Every time a smaller quantity, almost guaranteed. I don't see why it would be, because then that would be a subsidy or something, right? So so yeah, it creates this new quantity. It creates these two new prices, right? And then I believe everything between this actually should be tax, right? And as you, why is the consumer share of tax burden so much less than producer? Demand. Oh, because demand is more elastic, right? So demand is more elastic, so consumers just stop buying it altogether, and so the producers share burden. So yeah. Anyways, this is really complex if they don't understand it, and so walking them through how this works, I found to be really useful, or at least the students have told me is really useful. Of course, I can't tell you how many times a student has said something's really useful, and then you try to apply it, and they're like, I don't know what this is. So we'll see how it works. But at any rate, USAT, I don't think, and they do the best they can, because econ every year is one of the largest resources, and so they do the best they can within the certain amount of pages they want to create of explaining all this, but it's not enough. So you really need to send your students out for outside information on economics, which is great because there's tons of it. And so, or you become the outside outlet and you walk them through the processes bit by bit, right? So I think, again, if we go back here, so I think micro is a lot tougher than macro. Not to say macro is not easy, but macro is very much like these. It does build on supply and demand, but it's also like, hey, here's how the government does this different stuff, and there is some supply and demand markets. I believe the money market is considered macro, right? Stuff like that. The foreign exchange stuff. It's all above me. I have not looked at macro in years, and I don't want to. So yeah, I think if you can really work them through, build them up, right? Start with supply and demand shifts, make them understand that, right? Make them understand elasticity on its own. We get them to understand elasticity on its own, about how, the intuitiveness of an inelastic product means that if the price changes, it doesn't matter that much. And so when a price changes, when a price increases, that helps that helps producers, because the good's inelastic, and the people will not shift away. Whereas if the price goes down, that's going to hurt producers, because they're just making less money with just as many consumers, right? Well, of course, a price down is always going to hurt suppliers. So understanding elasticity, and then going in talking about consumer producer surplus, understanding that independently of elasticity and elasticity, because I think when the students look at the supply and demand curves, they're not exactly seeing what it's trying to show, right? And what it's trying to show very simply is that everybody above this equilibrium point on demand, they're just simply they would purchase it, but they would purchase it at higher prices, right? All these people would purchase it at higher prices, which means that if we then create a triangle right here, we have a setup where the person up here is saving that amount of money to go purchase with something else, right? It's almost like an opportunity cost thing, right? They would use this point right here, they would use this amount to go purchase something else, and everybody here, right, even the person who's a cent above, right, who'd be willing to spend 51 cents on that apple instead of 50 cents, has an extra cent to go spend somewhere, So, and then, right, suppliers, right, you have suppliers who'd be willing to supply at lower prices, but since the price is higher, they're making producer surplus, and able to invest that into other places in their lives or into their company, right? So, understanding how surplus works, understanding how elasticity and inelasticity works, and then of course, from the get-go shifts and stuff, and then taking all those things and applying them to each other, right? Okay, well, if you have supply and demand shifts, how does that impact equilibrium price and quantity when supply is inelastic and demand's elastic, or when demand's inelastic and supply is elastic, right? Understanding how that works, understanding how, okay, well, if we shift supply and demand curves, how does that impact producer surplus? How does that impact consumer surplus, right? And then inelasticity with consumer producer surplus, right? If supply is inelastic, how does that impact producer surplus when we change the price, right? When we shift stuff, right? Putting all those pieces together, right? There's a bunch of tools in the toolkit: shifts, surplus, and elasticity, and then figuring all those out, and then putting all those tool pieces together, and then also adding taxes in on top, and then I think that's kind of the main crux of the difficulties with economics, with micro. There's some other stuff around the edges, right? When they talk about comparative advantage, which I feel like is macro more than micro. It's a macro idea, but I guess they're using a micro kind of concept to explain international trade and stuff. So, anyways, and then international trade and stuff like that on here as well is also important. Surplus and shortage. All those things will once you have created these puzzle pieces, you can then kind of put the picture together. But they're also like ever changing puzzle pieces, right? Also, having your kids understand a concept that they used to have, I believe, in economics, and USAN got rid of it. Ceteris paribus, understanding that you can only shift one thing at a time. You will never ever shift two things, right? All other things being equal, right? So if you're looking at a shift in supply, I cannot tell you how many times I'm like, okay, but if there's a shift in demand at the same time, it's like, no, we're not doing that. You're just gonna you're gonna junk things up. It's gonna make things impossible to understand. So yeah, I think those are the important things when it comes to teaching them micro, and I think that is something a coach can do. I've talked in the past. I don't think there's a lot of things coaches can do other than create a good environment, but I think econ is one of the exceptions. I think another exception is music fundamentals, which I'm not good at, so I'm not going to talk about right now. Maybe when I get good at it, I can talk about it. I think music fundamentals is another one that you can teach. We've talked a lot about it. Circle of fifths. Circle of fifths is an overrated thing. Do not let them get stressed out about the circle of fifths. Even if it's on the test, it's at most one question. And if you want to burn the bridge on that one question to make sure you get everything else as good as you can, do it. That question, the circle of fifths is reserved for the people who are trying to get 1000s. Don't sweat it that much. It's also intuitive. It also makes sense if they understand the keyboard. The one thing I will say about music fundamentals is get a keyboard. That is 100% something you need to do, or at least a way for them to visualize a keyboard and play with the keyboard, because the keyboard will allow them to visualize something that is not visual, which I think is the hardest part about music fundamentals. It is a purely auditory thing that is then written down into notes that they don't understand if they didn't take music or choir or whatever. So yeah, I do think that's one thing with music worth teaching. I know there's an econ video. Maybe I will talk about music fundamentals in a different video. Don't teach them math. Don't teach them math. Let them figure out math. Give them some guiding principles. Give them some ideas, and like if they're really stuck on something, help them figure it out themselves. Don't give them answers. Don't ever tell them how to do something. Let them figure out how that thing works themselves. I've talked about this again on previous videos, but a lot of people who are bad at math are bad at math because the way they've been taught throughout their schooling career has not worked. So you're just going to do that again, and then they're going to figure it out? No, you let them do work. You let them do math, and keep doing math, and keep doing math, and at some point, it'll click, right? At some point, the pieces will start to fall together. I'm telling you this as somebody who, I was okay at math before Decathlon. I got like a 620, 610 maybe on my math portion of my SAT. And then I went and took the SAT 2 for college to get out of a calculus class, and I think I got like a 760 or 740 after Decathlon. Like it wasn't because I got lucky that we were doing the year of like pre-cal and stuff and calculus and whatnot. I think that was really good, and statistics doesn't necessarily jive with all the other stuff that math does as well as that. But it was just the process of learning math. Like I had never really done it like that before. It had just been worksheets and go home and do these questions. Whereas, getting in the class, doing questions, working with my teammates on understanding how they worked made me way better at math. Am I going to say that you're going to get the same results? No. But I do think that, introducing a concept letting them work on it is what's important, not teaching them what to do. We've actually been using the math resource a lot this year so far. So, anyway, again, that might be another thing to do, another video to make. But I do believe that economics is one that they can bash their head against for years, reread, and still not understand. They need outside help, whether that's you, whether that's something like Khan Academy, whether that's videos on YouTube. There are way better ways, I think, for them to understand the economics you need them to understand than simply read the resource. So, anyway, thank you guys for watching. Again, subscribe to the YouTube channel, Zathlon, Twitter Academic Zathlon. I need to create a graphic for all this, so I can just paste it around in each of these videos. Dev Talk, Facebook page, Zathlon Academic Decathlon. Check us out everywhere. We are, and we'll keep producing videos for you guys. Thank you so much, and I will see you later.